Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where I'm coming to you from indoors today because it's quite cold outside. February is always cold here in Tokyo, but we've had an especially cold winter this year. Over at Hinokicho Park, where I usually like to make videos, we've had ice on the pond pretty much every day this winter, and frost on the ground as well, which is quite unusual here. Normally you only see ice and the frost maybe a few days in the entire winter. Plus, we've had a couple of really good snowstorms here, which the kids really love, but which I don't care for very much. And also, I'm indoors today because I'm not quite used to the cold here after spending last week in Okinawa. As many of you know, last week we were in Okinawa on our, late winter vacation. It was a very wonderful place. We stayed at a nice seaside hotel with a wonderful view of the ocean. The hotel was located kind of more to the northeast part of the island, and a very nice place. While we were there, we decided to drive over to the west side of the island to a place called Sea Glass Beach, which is a very beautiful beach with wonderful clean and warm water and an amazing assortment of seashells and things like that. Okinawa is a very wonderful place if you want to take a beach vacation but don't want to deal with the touristiness of places like Hawaii or Miami, and you don't like the crowds. The beaches are very quiet, they're very clean, they're very safe. You don't have to worry about being mugged in Okinawa or the panhandlers and stuff, which are all over Hawaii. It's easy to drive in Okinawa if you rent a car. Okinawa was an American territory up until 1970 or 71, so all the roads were kind of built to the American standard, which makes it very easy to drive compared to here in Tokyo, where I hate driving. I can't recommend it enough. So if you're really looking for an interesting place for a beach holiday, I would really recommend Okinawa. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started with the subject of today's video, and this is going to be another Minolta rangefinder camera. This particular one is the Minolta Super A. Those of you who are familiar with Minolta cameras probably realize that already. And those of you who are familiar with my videos probably know that I did a video about the Super A more than a year ago. But this camera arrived the other day, and the first thing I noticed is that this camera is quite a bit different from the camera which I previously did a video about. What makes it different is it doesn't have the focusing tab located on the body, which these cameras are usually fitted with. And when I got this camera, I was going to take off the lens, and the focusing tab has the lens release button located in the center of it. You push the release button and you turn the lock ring and remove the lens. And I noticed that it was gone. And I was wondering, well, how the hell do you take off the lens if it doesn't have the release button? And I was thinking, is this like some kind of like fixed lens version of the Super A? And then I noticed it had the on and off arrows on the lens. And so what you do is you just simply turn the dial and the lens pops off without having to mess with the focusing tab and the button. Then I did decide that Minolta finally, decided to simplify the design or make it less expensive to manufacture these cameras and simply improve the design somewhat. So it's quite interesting. And so I figured that maybe some of you have one of these cameras, maybe this version, and some of the instructions I gave in my previous video wouldn't apply to the later version. So that's why I'm doing the second video here. For those of you who didn't see the last video and are interested in knowing something about the Super A, the Super A was one of a couple of makes of cameras which were introduced in the late 1950s, which were an interchangeable lens rangefinder camera with a leaf shutter rather than the focal plane shutter, which was the standard for most rangefinder cameras going back to the 1920s. The leaf shutter was seen as kind of a technological improvement over the focal plane shutter system. For one thing, it made it easier to use a flash. You could use a flash at all shutter speeds with the leaf shutter, whereas with a focal plane shutter, you're kind of limited in the shutter speed range. You can't use a shutter speed in the faster speeds where the shutter curtains narrow up and just kind of let the light flash across the film. The fastest speed you can use a flash on the focal plane shutter is the one where the curtains are open all the way. And for most cameras, this in those days maybe 1/50th or 1/60th of a second. Whereas in this camera, you can use a flash all the way up to the maximum shutter speed. Another interesting thing about these cameras is that the leaf shutter was considered as a more reliable system than the focal plane shutter, because most of the focal plane shutters of those days were made of, rubber impregnated cloth or silk. And while this works really well and it's very effective and very accurate in most cases, the problem with the cloth is that it deteriorates over time. It can become dry rotted, it can become burned if you point the lens at the sun and the lens focuses the sun onto the shutter curtains. The cloth shutter curtains usually come with cloth shutter ribbons, which can break over time, and replacing the shutter curtains and shutter ribbons on these old cameras is quite an ordeal, and it's not the job which I like to do. That's something I experimented with in the old Zorky cameras, those old, FSU, former Soviet Union cameras, which were kind of a big rage about 15 years ago. All of them had bad shutters, so I kind of got into replacing those and figured out how to do it, but I would rather not do it if I could avoid doing it. They work well when they work, but compared to the other Minolta cameras of the day, I say the Minolta 1 and Minolta 2 rangefinder cameras, which were kind of Leica copies, the shutters on these cameras, the cloth was not very well made, and it's kind of hard for me to find the early Minolta cameras which have good shutter curtains. And the later versions, so like the 2B, sometimes these shutter curtains are in excellent condition. They did improve them, but from time to time I find these cameras which have broken shutter ribbons. These are all issues which you will never have if you have a camera with a leaf shutter. On the other hand, the leaf shutter has a more limited range of speed. You can get a 1/1000th top shutter speed out of a focal plane shutter, whereas with these shutters you are usually limited to a top speed of 1/500th of a second or a slower speed. This one is limited to 1/200th of a second because this has a very large shutter to be able to fire with a faster lens, like this 50mm f1.8 lens. That's the only main handicap for the leaf shutter system in an interchangeable lens rangefinder camera, which is designed to use faster lenses. If this were an f2.8 or f3.8 lens, they could make a faster shutter. And Minolta did, after I guess kind of like the outcry of the really slow shutter speed for this camera. They came out with their V2 and V3, which came out with very fast shutter speeds and allowed you to in case of the V2 to take wide aperture shots at higher shutter speeds, whereas the V3 it kind of stopped down a little bit because they couldn't actually move the shutter, the leaves at 1/3000th of a second, so they didn't quite open all the way. So, but it's the leaf shutter system is more reliable, and for me it's much easier to repair when there are problems with it. Replacing or overhauling a leaf shutter is much easier than replacing a focal plane shutter. So that's one advantage to this camera. There were only two major makers of interchangeable lens rangefinder cameras with leaf shutters. That was Minolta and Olympus. Olympus produced their Ace camera, and I've got a video somewhere here talking about the Ace camera, which was produced with 3 different lenses. It was a very simple camera, very well made, not very expensively made, but quite a popular camera, but not popular enough to really catch on and to continue making it for a long time. They made the original Ace, and then they made an Ace with a built-in light meter, and is kind of faded into oblivion when the fixed lens rangefinder cameras became more available. And that was the only interchangeable lens rangefinder camera which Olympus made. Minolta made a pretty large variety of interchangeable lens rangefinder cameras. Besides the Super A camera here, they also made their Leica copy cameras, and there were quite a few different variations of those. So Minolta had a lot of experience with these, and Minolta was really interested in the rangefinder kind of camera, and they made probably the most, wide range of cameras, or rangefinder cameras in those days. From the Himatic series to the Union Mats to the Super A to the earlier 2 series, the V series. I think Minolta was probably the most innovative maker of interchangeable lens rangefinder cameras. So let's go ahead and take a look at the features, controls, functions, and everything about the Super A, or this later version of the Super A. I'll also be talking a little bit about how to maintain these cameras if you have them, so I'll offer some tips and tricks as I go along to tell you how to do certain things to them. We'll go ahead and start at the top, as I usually do. Right here we have the film rewind knob. We have a shoe for mounting a flash gun, and then we have the shutter speed control ring. Minolta produced a clip-on light meter which slipped onto the flash shoe, and the light meter engaged the shutter speed ring, and as you turned a dial on the light meter, the match needle system would move, and when you would get it to the right setting, it would also recommend which aperture to use. So once you set that according to the light meter, the shutter speed, you would adjust the aperture as well, and you should be able to get a good exposure. Next to that, here we have a shutter release button which accepts a standard cable release, and here we have the film counter dial, and over here we have the film winding and shutter charging lever, and under this we have a film speed reminder dial with an indicator pin or slot right here, which you line it up with. If you come across one of these cameras, you're probably going to find that the inside of the viewfinder and rangefinder is very dirty and hazy. And it's not that difficult to clean up on one of these cameras if you know what you're doing. Unfortunately, most people don't know what they're doing when it comes to one of these cameras, and they tend to make some of these cameras I've come across are broken because people have tried to do some maintenance to them themselves. The first thing you have to do when you are removing the top cover is remove this screw from the rewind nut. Do not try to put a screwdriver through the film forks in the back and then turn the dial, which is what you usually do to remove it on most cameras, because that will break the rewind shaft, and these cameras are not easy to find. You'll never find a replacement unless you're really lucky. So you remove the screw and this just comes off. Make sure not to lose the screw. And the next thing you have to do is remove the film winding and shutter charging lever. And this is the more challenging part because you don't see any hardware here. And a lot of people think that to take it off, you have to turn this aluminum thing here like you would on other Minolta cameras, like the V3. But you don't. To remove this, you have to take a look at this slot here. And if you look at the slot, you'll see that there's a steel ring which goes all the way around here. It's a kind of a ring spring or spring ring, or something like a C-clip used for car engines or things like that. You need to remove that to remove the film winding lever. And to remove it, you take your finger and you put it on the top here. And then you take a box cutter or something with a sharp tip and you lift the spring up and out from under the channel. You have to keep your finger on here because if you don't, the spring will jump and fly away and you'll never see it again. And then and once again, the parts are hard to find for these cameras. Once the spring is out and you put it in a safe place where you will not lose it, you can lift out this aluminum dial here, and underneath you'll see a slotted screw. You'll remove the screw. There are a couple of washers. Just keep those in a safe place, and then everything just lifts right off. And then you take out the screws on either side of the top cover and take off this back cover. There are a couple of screws holding it on, and just lift it straight off, and that allows you access to all the internal parts of the viewfinder and rangefinder. When you are cleaning the optics on the inside of the viewfinder and rangefinder, do not touch the back side of the beam splitting mirror because it will rub off. And replacing the mirror in these cameras is quite difficult because it's a really long mirror and hard to find mirrors big enough to fit it. And once that's on, you simply put it back together. And underneath the back cover here, there's a rangefinder adjusting system. There are 3 screws. The middle screw is the one which you use for the horizontal adjustment. The screws above and below it are what you use to adjust the vertical adjustment. So moving to the back of the camera, here we have a depth of field guide here, which you can use to compute the depth of field for the different lenses. And so we have lenses here for the 35mm, 100mm, and 85mm lenses. That kind of gives you an idea of the different focal lengths, in addition to the 3 or 4 50mm lenses which this camera was equipped with. On the bottom of the camera we have a standard 1/4" tripod socket, and here we have the release button which you use to unlock the winding mechanism so you can rewind the film. On the front of the camera we have the basic stuff. We have a indicator here on the front indicator window. And the indicator window lets you know when the shutter is charged. It will show orange or red. Someone's at the door, but I'll just wait for them to come later. It shows red when the shutter is charged, and when you depress the shutter, it turns clear again. We have a depth of field scale here for the 50mm f1.8 lens. And the marks for the depth of field, I guess distance, are located on the front here. Then we have the focusing scale itself located on the base of the lens here, and it's arranged in feet from 3.5 feet to infinity. And of course we have the ring for removing the lens. We have two indicators here. We have off and on. So to remove it, you turn it in the direction which says off, and the lens pops off like so. And underneath you can see, I'm getting a little, like my throat is getting a little bit dry here. Sorry about that. And here you can see the shutter blades. Putting the lens back on, you line up the red marks on the bayonet collar and the lens body. And slide it on like so, and simply twist it to the right until it's locked into place. On the bottom here we have a sync socket for attaching a flash gun, and we have a couple of settings here for X or M for using a bulb or a strobe flash. And pretty much that's about it for this camera. Loading the film is not difficult. There's a lever here which you pull downward to open the film lever, or excuse me, the film door. Let me take a drink here just a moment to clear my throat. Okay, much better. Alright, so to load the film, you push up on the forks here so the rewind knob pops upward. Drop your film canister inside and push this back down to hold it in place. Pull your film leader across and feed it into the take-up spool, and simply wind the film and fire the shutter until the film is pulled across and the holes on the top and the bottom of the film are being taken up in the teeth on the take-up sprocket. Close the film door and simply wind the film until the number 1 is showing up here in the viewfinder. It's a really cool camera, and what I really liked about this camera is that it came with a 50mm Rocore lens, the f1.8 lens, which was the lens which came on the Minolta 2B Leica mount camera. And this was probably the best of the interchangeable lenses which Minolta introduced for the rangefinder cameras. It's very highly regarded here, and in Japan, though the 2B camera is a popular camera, and that's where this lens came with as the original equipment. The lens itself is much more popular than the camera, and has been adapted to things like digital photography or even videography. A lot of people really love the 50mm f1.8 lens. It's quite rare on the Super A, and I only see them come up once in a while, and most of the cameras which I see fitted with this lens, the lens is in bad condition. This one here has a small ding on the filter threads, which I can go ahead and remove. But what I love about this lens is it doesn't have any scratches or cleaning marks, which is quite rare for these cameras. The lenses are very good on these cameras, but a little bit on the soft side. So you have to be kind of careful when cleaning them. Whenever I'm cleaning one of these lenses or an expensive lens, I always try to blow off the dust before I start cleaning the lens, because I don't want the dust kind of scratching the glass. And I use a good microfiber cloth for cleaning the lenses. Never use tissue paper because that kind of scratches them. And keeping the lens in good condition, keeping the cleaning marks and scratches off of it, and not only does it perform better, but it gives the lens much more resale value in the future if you decide to sell the camera or lens. I'm trying to come across some of the other lenses which came with this camera, especially the 35mm lens. I want to get one of those and go out and just try it and see how it performs, but they're quite expensive, and the 35mm lens usually by itself sells for more than a complete camera with a 50mm lens, but hopefully one of these days I'll find one which is fairly reasonable and in good condition. As many of you know who have been watching my videos, I've been trying to be very consistent in posting new videos. I'm trying to get one up every other day or every third day at the latest. I plan to be doing more videos like this in the future and trying to keep up, keep putting new videos to keep people interested in them, and also I like making the videos. If you do like the video, please click the thumbs up button. If you like if you'd like to see more, please subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.